My name is Linda Hayward, and the worst part wasn't that my husband called me lazy, it was that he truly believed I was. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. I was standing at the sink, elbow deep in dishwater, while Greg leaned against the doorway with his arms crossed and a familiar smirk twisting the corner of his mouth. "You know it's not that hard to wipe down the counters when you're done," he said casually, as if offering a helpful tip instead of delivering his daily insult. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have something to say, believe me I did, but because arguing with Greg was like trying to teach a brick wall how to feel empathy. You'd only exhaust yourself and end up doubting your own sanity. He continued. My mom always kept the house spotless. I don't know how you let it get like this. Like this. As if a few toys in the living room, a laundry basket by the stairs, and 2 dishes in the sink were signs of a collapsing society. Never mind the fact that I'd already made breakfast, packed 2 school lunches, vacuumed the downstairs, and cleaned out the litter box before 10 a.m. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from snapping. Greg's voice, once something I found comforting when we were dating, had taken on the pitch of a prosecutor. Not just today. For years now. And his courtroom. Our house. You always leave everything half done, he added, strolling past me to open the fridge. Like you start cleaning but lose focus. He was talking about the oven mitt I'd left on the counter. The one I hadn't returned to the drawer because, imagine this, I was still using the oven. I'm still cooking, I said flatly. Greg sighed like I was a disappointment he'd grown tired of tolerating. Excuses again? I turned away so he wouldn't see my face crumple. Not into tears, no. Into anger. A quiet, boiling anger that had nowhere to go. Not yet. This was a pattern. I'd clean and tidy and organize, and Greg would walk in and find one small thing. A dust bunny under the couch, a cereal box left open, a fingerprint on the microwave door, and he'd use that as proof that I was messy, that I didn't care, that I was letting myself and the home go. And he called it honesty. I called it erosion. Later that day, I was folding laundry when our 8-year-old daughter, Emily, came into the room and asked Mom, "Why is Dad always mad at you?" I stopped mid-fold. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She shrugged. "He's always saying you forgot something. Or messed up. Even when you didn't." My hands went still on the stack of shirts. Children don't lie. And children don't always know how to sugarcoat truth. I smiled at her gently and told her to go play, but that moment wedged itself deep into me like a splinter. That night, while brushing my teeth, I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked dull. My mouth silent, even in my own home, seemed small, like it had forgotten how to speak up. When did I become the background noise of my own life? Greg came in and dropped his dirty clothes right next to the hamper. Not in it. Just beside it. I watched him in the mirror, not saying a word. Then he turned, saw my look, and scoffed. "What now?" I rinsed my mouth. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was the first time I realized that he had trained me to believe I was the mess, when in fact it was his contempt that had made our home feel unlivable. The next morning, the sink had one unwashed spoon in it. Just one. And as I was walking toward it, Greg came downstairs and said, "Wow, you couldn't even do the dishes." I looked at him. Really looked. And in that moment, something in me hardened. Not out of spite, not yet, but out of clarity. I picked up the spoon, washed it slowly, dried it carefully, then turned and smiled sweetly. "You're right," I said. "It must be so hard living in a house with someone like me." He nodded, missing the sarcasm entirely. "Finally you get it." "No, Greg, you'll get it. Very soon." Because I was done apologizing for dust while carrying the weight of everyone else's dirt. And I was about to make you clean up your own mess for once. Greg liked to say I lived in chaos. He'd joke to his friends, the ones who came over to watch football, and left beer bottles half drained on the coffee table, that he was the clean one in the relationship. That I was always misplacing things, never keeping up with chores, and letting the place go to the dogs. The punchline, of course, was always me. I laughed at first, the way women do when they're conditioned to keep the peace. I smiled and played along even when my gut twisted. But inside I hated it. I hated that he painted himself as some long-suffering neat freak, when in reality he contributed as much to the house as a houseplant, except the plant might actually purify the air. One day at a family gathering, Greg was helping himself to a second plate of food when his sister said something like, "Greg, you're lucky Linda puts up with your clutter." He blinked, surprised. "Clutter me?" His sister laughed. "Come on. You've always been messy. Mom had to follow you around with a broom when we were kids." Greg's expression soured for half a second before he quickly changed the subject, but I noticed. That moment stayed with me. You see, Greg didn't hate mess. He hated me being associated with mess, because to him a wife who wasn't perfectly put together was a reflection of his failure. I wasn't failing at housework. I was failing at upholding his illusion, the picture-perfect wife, with a polished kitchen and a plastered smile. The next day, he made a passive remark while we were folding laundry. "If you could just fold the towels the right way, we'd save so much space." I looked at him. "What's the right way?" "You know, like hotels do. Nice and tight." "And you want our house to feel like a hotel?" He paused. "I want it to feel clean." "No. You want it to feel like someone else is handling everything." He scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." That word dramatic was his go-to whenever I dared to challenge the narrative. If I cried, I was too emotional. If I stood my ground, I was overreacting. And if I stayed quiet, he took it as proof that he was right. It was like I couldn't win. Not unless I disappeared completely. That evening, I went upstairs to tuck our daughter into bed. Emily was reading a book about astronauts. "Mom," she asked, "do astronauts ever get sad?" "Sometimes," I said. "Why do you ask?" "Because they're really far away, and no one can hear them cry." I sat down beside her, my heart suddenly heavier than I could explain. "Yeah, that would be hard." She closed the book. "Are you far away?" That question didn't come from nowhere. It came from observation. From the way she watched me move around the house, quiet, tired, small. Children know when their mother is pretending to be okay. I kissed her forehead and said, "Not anymore." The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Melanie, an old friend from college who now worked at a local insurance firm. We had been close once, but life and motherhood had pulled me away from everyone who wasn't directly tied to Greg or the kids. I wasn't calling to catch up. I was calling because last week I'd seen her job post on Facebook. Part-time admin assistant, flexible hours, light customer service. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something that would get me out of the house. And more importantly, remind me I still had value outside the sink and stove. Mel answered on the second ring. "Linda," she said, surprised. "Wow, it's been forever." "I know, and I'm sorry for the silence, but I was wondering if the job opening you posted is still available." She paused, then brightened. "It is. Are you interested?" "I am." And that was how the shift began. Quiet. Simple. No big speeches or declarations. Just a small decision in a moment of quiet courage. When I told Greg that night, his reaction was predictably smug. "You," he said, chuckling. "Working, doing what exactly? Office support?" I replied calmly. "It's part-time. I start next Monday." He blinked. "Wait, you already got it?" "I did." He laughed, not out of joy, but disbelief. "You won't last a month. I don't need to last forever. Just long enough." Long enough for what I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up his empty coffee mug and placed it in the dishwasher without a word. Greg didn't realize it, but that was the moment I stopped being his unpaid maid. The next few days passed quickly. I arranged childcare logistics with our neighbor, prepped simple meals, and laid out the morning schedule like a military plan. Greg was to handle the school run and make sure the laundry didn't rot in the machine. He rolled his eyes at every detail. You're acting like I've never done housework before. You haven't. He gave a low chuckle. We'll see how long this fantasy of yours lasts. But Monday came. And I left. I walked out the front door at 7:45 a.m. with my tote bag and my thermos of coffee, and a quiet fire burning in my chest. At the office, I felt like I had stepped into another world. People greeted me by name. They asked for my opinion. They thanked me when I helped them. It wasn't glamorous. I spent most of the day entering data and answering phones. But every minute I was there, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. That night, I came home to find the dishes still in the sink and Greg on the couch watching TV. Oh, he said, barely looking up. You're back. I am. Can you cook something I didn't have time? I walked to the kitchen, looked at the mess and back at him. No, I said simply. I'm exhausted. You'll need to figure it out. He turned stunned. Excuse me, I said, I'm tired. There are leftovers in the fridge. Or you can make something. But Greg, I said, meeting his eyes with more steel than I ever had, if I can work outside the house, and you still expect me to do everything inside it, you're not looking for a partner. You're looking for a servant. He didn't have a response. I went upstairs, took a long shower, and fell into bed next to my sleeping daughter. I knew this was only the beginning. But I also knew something even more important. The distance between me and the woman I used to be was getting smaller every day. I didn't expect applause for working. I didn't want congratulations. All I wanted was for anyone to notice what I'd been carrying all these years. But if Greg noticed, he didn't say a word. That first week I came home to a house slowly unraveling. Laundry half folded and left on the couch. A sink full of dishes soaking in cold, greasy water. The kids' school folders unopened. The garbage can sagging with uncollected trash. Greg would act surprised, confused, even when I'd gently pointed out. I was just about to do that, he'd say. But then I had to check something online. Or I didn't know they needed their math sheets signed. Or my favorite, well, you've been doing it so long you've got a system. A system, that word, like I was a machine. What Greg couldn't grasp was that I didn't have a system. I had instincts sharpened by years of living inside a home where everything depended on me running it smoothly. Where no one noticed the invisible thread I pulled to keep it all from falling apart. But now I had stepped away. And without me, the thread was starting to fray. On Thursday night, I got a call from the school secretary. Hi, Mrs. Hayward. I just wanted to confirm if Emily is still coming on the field trip tomorrow. We didn't get her permission slip or the fee. I paused. I sent both in on Monday. There was a pause. Ah, looks like we sent it back. It had the wrong amount. Of course. Greg had filled it out, then left it crumpled at the bottom of her backpack. A mistake, sure, but what got me wasn't the error. It was what came after. When I told him about it calmly and without blame, Greg scoffed. Why didn't you double-check it then? And just like that, the responsibility had circled right back to me. Even when I stepped out, I was still expected to sweep up after him. That weekend, he tried to prove he was managing just fine. I came home Saturday afternoon from a work training to find Greg in the kitchen floor, dusting his shirt, a frying pan sizzling with something unidentifiable. He looked up, grinning. Thought I'd give you a break tonight. I nodded, careful not to sound suspicious. Thank you. But the kitchen, the walls, the floor, the stove looked like a small storm had passed through. Dirty spoons on every counter. Eggshells in the sink. A box of pasta open on its side. I stepped over a measuring cup on the floor. Greg beamed. Smells good, right? I smiled. It does. And that was the problem. He wanted praise for doing the thing I did every day, without disaster, without mess, without applause. I cleaned the kitchen in silence after dinner while he sat on the couch satisfied. That night, as I climbed into bed, a phrase I'd once read came back to me. When a man cooks, it's an event. When a woman cooks, it's expected. And I wondered, what if I stopped expecting anything from him at all? On Sunday it rained. One of those slow, steady downpours that softens everything sound, thought, memory. I was in the living room folding laundry when our son Matt walked in and sat down beside me. He's 12, quiet, thoughtful, always watching. He said Dad's been really cranky lately. I folded a towel. You think so? Matt nodded. He gets mad when things aren't done, but he doesn't want to do them himself. I didn't say anything. He looked at me. Is it weird that I notice that now I turn to him? No. It means you're starting to understand things. Things like what? Things like how hard it is to be taken for granted. He didn't speak after that. He just sat with me, two folded towels between us, silence thick as soup. And I realized my children weren't blind. They had been watching all along, learning, absorbing. And one day they'd model what they saw. That evening, Greg had the audacity to complain about the bathroom. There's toothpaste in the sink again, he said, motioning with his chin as I put away the dinner plates. I blinked. Yes. The kids brushed their teeth. He raised an eyebrow. Well, someone should clean it up. I'm sure you'll get to it. He laughed as if I was joking. Then he stopped. Wait. You mean me? Why not you? Because... come on, Linda. No. You come on, Greg. You've had a month to learn what it takes to keep this house going. You still think the mess magically disappears. I never said that. You don't have to say it. You live like it's true. That was the moment. Not explosive, not dramatic, just honest. He turned away. You've changed. No. I've just stopped pretending I don't see what's been here all along. He left the room, and for the first time in years, I didn't follow. Later that night, I found myself standing alone in the kitchen. The rain was still falling outside, tapping a rhythm against the windows. My reflection looked back at me in the dark glass. There were laugh lines by my eyes, worry etched into my brow. But beneath all that was a quiet strength, a foundation being rebuilt. And that's when I knew I wasn't trying to win Greg's approval anymore. I wasn't trying to prove I wasn't messy, or that I was worthy, or that I could be enough. Because I was enough, and I always had been. He just never saw it. But I do. And I was about to make sure my kids saw it too. Greg liked to joke that he was the man of the house. But it was clear now, without me smoothing every corner, he didn't even know how the house ran. By the time the second month of my job rolled around, I had officially transitioned to 4 full days a week at the office. Melanie, my boss and old friend, had pulled me aside after a weekly meeting. You're a natural, she said. Detail-oriented, calm under pressure. You've got a rhythm most people take months to develop. I smiled, not the small, polite smile I usually wore at home, but the kind that warmed from the chest. Thanks, Mel. It's been grounding. She nodded. You're finding yourself again. Yes. Yes, I was. At work, I was Linda. Just Linda. Not a wife. Not a housekeeper. Not the target of daily criticism. Just a person valuable, efficient, respected. But at home, Greg was unraveling. He had taken the bait I'd set fine. You think I'm messy? You take care of everything then. And now he was in over his head. On Monday, he forgot to pack Emily's lunch. Again. She called me from the nurse's office, embarrassed, whispering into the phone. Mom, I told Dad, but he said he thought lunch was free this week. It wasn't. On Tuesday, the dog had an accident in the laundry room. Greg left it there, said he didn't have time to clean it because he was multitasking breakfast. By Wednesday, the recycling had overflowed into the hallway, and the kids were stepping over cereal boxes like urban explorers navigating ruins. But Greg still in denial. I've got it under control, he said as I walked through the door that evening, arms full of groceries I bought after work. Really? I asked, scanning the disaster. It's just a rough patch. He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. No, Greg. It's a glimpse of what I've been doing for 12 years without help. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped, closed it, picked up a paper towel and began wiping something off the counter, absent-minded, distracted like a student caught cheating mid-test. But I wasn't looking for him to admit defeat. I was watching something deeper, the beginning of recognition. The shift from ignorance to uncomfortable truth. It wasn't happening quickly, but it was happening. That Friday, I stayed late at the office helping organize a client event, and when I got home, Greg was standing in the hallway looking guilty. "What's wrong?" I asked, locking the front door behind me. He hesitated. "The kids had cereal for dinner." I blinked. Okay, I was going to cook. But then Matt needed help with homework and I forgot the chicken was still frozen, and Greg. I interrupted, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's fine. They ate. They're alive." He looked at me like I'd just pardoned him for murder. "I thought you'd be mad." "I'm not mad," I said. "Just, now you see." He didn't respond. But in that silence, I saw something shift behind his eyes. The shame. The understanding. The next morning, Greg made pancakes. They were rubbery and slightly burnt, but the kids were thrilled. Emily hugged him around the waist. "Thanks, Daddy." I didn't say a word. Didn't offer to clean. Didn't reach for a spatula. I let him handle every part of it, cooking, plating, cleaning, managing spills. He was sweating by 10:00 a.m. By noon, he lay on the couch, eyes closed, muttering, "How do you do this every day?" I walked past him with my purse, heading out for my first support group meeting at the local women's center. "Where are you going?" he called out. "Out." "For what?" "To meet people who don't think I'm just a maid." I didn't say it with venom. I said it like a weather report. Calm, factual, the truth. The group was small, 6 women, all of us from different walks of life. Some were single, some divorced, some still married and trying to find a way forward. We sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, sipping tea and sharing fragments of our lives. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated. Then I said I didn't realize how invisible I'd become until I stopped cleaning up after everyone. There were knowing nods, soft sounds of agreement. One woman whispered, "That's when they notice. When you stop." I went home that evening feeling seen in a way I hadn't in years. Greg was quiet. The house was mostly intact. The kids were watching a movie, bowls of popcorn in their laps. Greg handed me a cup of tea. I accepted it, sat down, said nothing. He said, "I know I've been hard on you." I looked at him. "You think?" He exhaled. "I didn't realize how much you were doing. I always thought it was normal, that it just got done." "By magic, by you," he admitted. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was the first stone in a long road. And I wasn't walking backward anymore. The next day, I received my first paycheck. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. Earned, not assumed. Deposited into my own account, separate from Greg's. I bought myself a new pair of work shoes, sturdy, professional, nothing flashy. Greg raised an eyebrow. "Treating yourself, yes," I said. And I plan to keep doing it. I started journaling again. Small entries, quiet truths. I am not a mess. I am a woman who held a house together with thread and silence, and I am done being quiet. From that point on, Greg tried harder. He started packing the kids' lunches, folded the laundry without complaint, asked me for the first time if I needed anything before he went to the store. Was it progress, maybe? But I wasn't measuring my life by his steps anymore. I was watching mine. There was a moment not long after I got my second paycheck when I realized something strange was happening. I was laughing again. Not the strained kind you use at dinner tables to keep the mood light. Not the dry chuckle when someone says something rude, but you don't have the energy to challenge it. No, this laugh came from somewhere buried deep inside me, a part of me that had been buried beneath laundry piles and sarcastic comments for years. It happened at the office. Melanie had spilled her coffee all over a stack of invoices and made a face so dramatic we all burst out laughing. And I laughed too freely, loudly, and just like that I remembered who I used to be. That version of me, the Linda who had wit and lightness and a sense of humor, had been trapped under the weight of Greg's passive insults for so long she'd nearly disappeared. But now she was starting to show her face again. And the more I laughed, the more Greg sulked. He wouldn't say it out loud, of course, but he started asking pointed questions when I got home. Who was at the office today? Why are you in such a good mood? You're not dressing up for him, are you? I stared at him, puzzled. Who you know? That guy. Melanie's brother. The one who works in marketing. I blinked slowly. His name is Peter. He's gay. He talks about his husband every other sentence. Greg flushed. Well, it's not about him specifically. You've just been different. Yes, I said plainly. I have. He stood there like he expected me to backpedal to soften it with a joke or some self-deprecating remark. But I didn't, because I was different. And I wasn't sorry. The house had changed too, not cleaner or messier, just different. There were still baskets of laundry, but they were Greg's responsibility now. He did them mostly. Not the way I did, but that wasn't my concern anymore. The kids adjusted quickly. Emily started brushing her own hair in the mornings. Matt packed his school bag without being told. They didn't whine, they didn't rebel. They rose like children do when they finally see their mother standing up straight again. But Greg didn't rise. Greg resisted. He began acting like he was the victim of some great domestic injustice, like I had tricked him into a role he never agreed to, as if all I'd done was shift my burden onto him without warning. You're making me do everything now, he snapped one Thursday evening. I was sitting on the couch reviewing a file for work with a blanket over my lap, and the dog curled up at my feet. I looked up calmly. Everything. Yes, he said, gesturing wildly. I picked up the kids. I made dinner. I did the dishes. And before I said slowly who did all that, he froze. I tilted my head. Every day. For years. His jaw twitched. And did I ever call it everything silence? He turned and walked into the kitchen, muttering something under his breath. I didn't chase him. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. Because it was no longer my job to soothe a man who had never cared to soothe me. That weekend, the pressure got to him. It started with a sock. Yes, a sock. It was Saturday morning. The sun was streaming through the window. I was sipping coffee, half listening to Emily hum to herself in the dining room while she colored. Greg came stomping down the stairs, holding a lone sock between his fingers like it was diseased. Why, he demanded, are socks always everywhere in this house? I looked at him amused. Because people live here? No, he said. It's because no one respects this space. No one follows a system. There's no structure anymore. I raised an eyebrow. You mean now that I'm not doing everything? He slammed the sock down on the counter. This isn't working. I stood up slowly. You mean you're not working? You're overwhelmed, and instead of admitting it, you're throwing tantrums over socks. I'm not throwing a tantrum. You're holding a sock like it insulted your ancestors. He glared at me. You think this is funny? No, I said. I think it's sad. Because all I did was ask you to do what I've done for years, and now you act like the world's ending. He shook his head, furious. You've changed. You used to care. You used to try. I walked over and picked up the sock gently. I used to be scared. Of you. Of disappointing you. Of not being enough. But not anymore. He stared at me. For a moment I thought he might cry, but instead he turned and left the room. And I felt no guilt. That night, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling and wondered what our marriage had really been built on. Not love, not respect, not partnership, just roles, expectations, a system that benefited one of us and buried the other. And now that the system had broken, he wasn't grieving the loss of me, he was grieving the loss of control. Monday morning came and I got dressed in silence. A navy blouse, dark jeans, gold earrings I hadn't worn in years. Greg watched me from the doorway. "You're really going to keep working?" I met his eyes. "Yes. And the house. You're in it. You figure it out." He said nothing, just walked away. And as I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, I felt lighter than I had in years, not because life was perfect, but because I had finally stopped pretending it needed to be. Greg always prided himself on having everything under control, but control, I learned, is a fragile thing when it's built on the assumption that someone else will always pick up the slack. By the third month of my working, the house had developed a rhythm, not a perfect one, but one that functioned. Matt and Emily had adapted beautifully. They packed their own bags, set their own alarms, even cleaned up their cereal bowls without being asked. Not because Greg taught them, but because they watched me even when I wasn't trying to teach. Greg, on the other hand, was fraying. It showed in small, telling ways. He burned toast every morning, muttering curses under his breath. He forgot to sign school slips, then blamed the teachers for sending too many papers. He snapped at the dog for barking too loudly and scolded Emily for spilling juice, even though she cleaned it up herself. But the moment that told me he was truly slipping came one Tuesday morning when I caught him standing in the hallway staring at a single shoe. Just standing there, mouth slightly open, as if the shoe had personally offended him. I walked past him with my coffee. "Need help with something?" I asked. He didn't look at me. "Why are there always things everywhere?" "Because we live here." "But why isn't anything where it's supposed to be?" I took a sip. "You might want to ask your past self." He seemed to have a lot of opinions on the topic. Greg turned, his face flushed. "Don't do that. Do what? Talk to me like I'm some idiot who can't figure out a shoe." I stared at him deadpan. "You're talking about a shoe? At 7:30 in the morning? Like it's a life crisis." He didn't respond. Just turned back to the shoe as if willing it to behave differently. At work that day, I found myself chuckling about it during lunch with Melanie. "He got into a standoff with a sneaker," I said, shaking my head. Melanie smirked. "Sounds like he's drowning." "Oh, he's flailing," I replied. "And I'm not throwing him a lifeboat." She leaned in, voice gentle. "How are you feeling about all of it?" I paused. That question used to trigger guilt, self-doubt, a flood of what-ifs. But now relieved, I said honestly. For the first time in years, I'm not carrying everything. That night, I got home to find Greg hunched over the dining room table, surrounded by papers and receipts. "What's going on?" I asked. He looked up like a deer in headlights. "The budget's a mess. I didn't know the kids had this many school expenses. And the utilities are due. And I think I paid the water bill twice." I leaned on the doorway, watching him with something close to pity. "I used to handle all of that," I said. "I know," he snapped. "But you never told me how complicated it was." I tilted my head. "Would you have listened if I had—" He opened his mouth, then shut it. Greg had always assumed things just worked. That the pantry stayed stocked, the bills paid, the appointments made, as if the house operated on some invisible autopilot. But it wasn't autopilot, it was me. And now that he was in the pilot seat, he was flying blind. Still, I didn't offer to take the controls back. Not because I wanted to watch him fail, but because I wanted him to understand the cost of his ignorance. Later that week, he forgot to pick up Emily from ballet. She waited 25 minutes outside the studio until another parent called me. I left work early and found her sitting on the curb hugging her knees. When we got home, I found Greg on the couch scrolling his phone. "I forgot," he said, not even looking up. I stood there in the doorway, My jaw clenched. You forgot your daughter. He looked annoyed. Don't make it a big deal. She's fine, isn't she? My voice dropped to a whisper. Do you know how many times I waited outside school with a toddler on my hip and groceries melting in the trunk because you got stuck on a work call? And I never said a word. He looked up surprised. You never told me. Because I didn't want to make you feel bad? I said, but maybe I should have. Emily crept up the stairs quietly. She didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered on Greg, not with anger, with disappointment, and that I think wounded him more than anything I could have said. The next day, Greg tried to fix it in the only way he knew how. He came home with pizza and ice cream. He cleaned the kitchen and lit candles. When I walked in, the house smelled like garlic and effort. I raised an eyebrow. What's this peace offering? He said. I know I've been out of line. I sat down. You have. I didn't know it would be this hard. I told you. For years. He nodded. I didn't listen. We sat in silence. The flickering candlelight threw soft shadows across his face. Then he added quietly, I don't know who I am in this house anymore. And there it was, the root of it all. Greg had built his identity around being the provider, the one in control, the authority. When I stopped performing the supporting role, the whole narrative fell apart. But it wasn't my job to rebuild it for him. I reached for a slice of pizza. Maybe it's time you figure that out without making me smaller in the process. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. Fair. We didn't talk much after that. But there was a shift. Not a grand transformation. Not some dramatic repentance. Just a man slowly realizing that respect isn't about who brings in the paycheck or who folds the towels a certain way. It's about partnership. And he had failed at that. I didn't rush to forgive him. Because sometimes the only way to teach someone what you've lived through is to let them live it themselves. And Greg, he was just getting started. The interesting thing about pride is that it survives best in private. In the walls of our home, Greg could grumble and excuse himself all he wanted. Blame bad luck. Blame a broken system. Blame me. But outside those walls in front of others, his facade was much harder to maintain. That Saturday, his mother came to visit. Elaine Hayward, retired schoolteacher, still sharp as glass at 71. A woman who wore pearls on casual Fridays and judged dust like it was a moral failure. Greg cleaned for hours before she arrived. He scrubbed the baseboards, wiped down the kitchen counters twice, even Febreze the throw pillows. When I asked if he needed help, he waved me off. I've got it, he said confidently, as if he'd always been in charge of our home. I watched him silently, not to mock him, but to observe, to see what he considered help now that he knew the truth, that the house didn't clean itself, and no one was coming to pick up behind him anymore. Elaine arrived in a cloud of perfume and gentle disapproval. Darling, she said, air-kissing Greg's cheek. You look tired. He smiled stiffly. Busy week. She stepped into the living room, her eyes sweeping the space like a military inspector. It's cozy. Which was Elaine speak, for I see the dust on the baseboards. Then she turned to me. Linda, dear, you look refreshed. Thank you, I said, pouring her tea. I've been working. Oh, she blinked. You mean at a job? Yes, I replied. Office administrator. 3 months now. Elaine's eyebrows rose. How progressive. I glanced at Greg, waiting to see if he'd chime in with one of his usual barbs. But he stayed silent, studying his cup. Elaine sipped her tea. And how's the house faring without your full-time attention? I smiled sweetly. Ask your son. Greg shifted uncomfortably. Elaine chuckled, amused. Oh, don't be modest, Greg. I'm sure you're holding down the fort. And then, like fate herself had a sense of humor, Emily walked into the room with yogurt on her shirt, holding a sticky popsicle stick. Daddy said I could have 2, she announced, beaming. Elaine blinked. Before lunch, Emily nodded proudly. He forgot what time it was. Elaine's gaze slowly slid back to Greg. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. After lunch, Elaine pulled me aside in the hallway. "You're very composed," she said softly. "I hope he's treating you fairly." I hesitated, then answered honestly. "He's learning." She studied me, then gave a single nod. "Good. It's about time." And just like that, I realized something I hadn't before. Even his mother knew he'd leaned on me too heavily all these years. It wasn't just in my head. That night, Greg barely spoke. He sat at the edge of the bed like a scolded boy, uncharacteristically quiet. "You okay?" I asked. "She used to praise everything I did," he muttered. "Now she thinks I'm incompetent." She didn't say that. She didn't have to. I folded my arms. "Welcome to my world." He looked up, and for a brief moment I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years. Not arrogance, not frustration, but shame. Quiet, gnawing shame. The next morning he asked if I wanted breakfast. I declined. I had plans. I was meeting a friend from the support group, Clara, for coffee. She was going through her own transformation after a messy separation, and we had bonded over shared stories of disappearing into our marriages. We sat at a little cafe downtown, sunlight dappling the table. "Your husband still there?" Clara asked, stirring her cappuccino. "For now," I said. "But I don't know if the version of him I need will ever show up." She nodded. "That's the hardest part. Realizing love isn't enough if it comes with disrespect." I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure yet what I felt. Love, pity, distance. All three. When I returned home that afternoon, the living room was clean, the laundry folded. Greg was vacuuming the stairs. He looked up startled. "Hey, didn't hear you come in?" "Looks good," I said, gesturing to the house. He shrugged, trying to keep up. I nodded. "That's new." He turned off the vacuum. "Look, I've been thinking." That phrase from his mouth used to trigger dread. But now I simply waited. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "But I don't know how to be this version of me. The one that doesn't call the shots. The one that doesn't have all the answers." I met his eyes. "I never needed you to have all the answers, Greg. I just needed you to see me. I do now." "Do you?" I asked softly. "Because seeing me means acknowledging all the years you didn't." He was quiet. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. "You're right. No excuses. No jokes. Just that, you're right. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was closer than he'd ever come." That night we didn't argue. We didn't talk much either. We just sat on opposite sides of the couch, the space between us filled with something new. Not tension, not silence, but possibility. A few days later, Emily handed me a drawing she'd made at school. It was our family, her Matt, Greg, and me standing under a rainbow. But in the picture, I was in the front, standing tall, smiling, holding hands with both kids. Greg was behind us, pushing a stroller with the dog in it, looking confused. I laughed. "What's this?" Emily grinned. "You're the boss now." I glanced at Greg, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Why do you say that I asked her?" She shrugged. "Because when you talk, people listen now?" Out of the mouths of babes. I never thought I'd be the type of woman who recorded her husband. But then again, I never thought I'd be the type of woman who needed to. It started as a reflex, a quiet, instinctive decision made in the middle of one of Greg's tirades. He wasn't yelling exactly, but his voice was raised sharp and slicing. "All over 2 bowls left in the sink. They've been there for 2 days, Linda." He snapped, hands planted on his hips. If I didn't always have to pick up after everyone, I calmly picked up my phone, opened the recorder app, and hit the red button. He didn't notice. He was too busy ranting about the dishes, the dog hair, the grocery list I hadn't finalized, the towel left damp on the bed. He went on for 7 minutes, and I just stood there listening, letting the app do its quiet work. I didn't plan to share the recording. This wasn't revenge porn. This wasn't for social media. This was for me, for the version of me who still sometimes doubted whether I was overreacting, whether I had made it all up, whether he really was as harsh as I remembered or whether time had distorted the details. No, there it was, in his own voice, sharp, dismissive, blaming me for things he himself had forgotten to do. I replayed it later that night, sitting on the bathroom floor with headphones and the door locked. And I cried. Not because of what he said. I'd heard worse. I cried because I'd gotten so used to this tone of voice, the contempt, the condescension that it took hearing it as an outsider for me to realize how deeply it had shaped me. The next morning, I met with my therapist, Jen, and played a portion of the clip. She listened quietly. When it ended, she looked at me with soft, steady eyes. "Do you hear how dehumanizing that is?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm not saying you're in danger," she added, "but I am saying this is emotional erosion. It's slow, but devastating." I left her office with something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. That afternoon, when Greg texted me complaining about the vacuum not charging, I didn't reply. He called twice before I got home. When I walked through the front door, the house was unusually quiet. Greg was sitting on the couch, shoulders slumped, the unplugged vacuum beside him. "I can't do this," he muttered. I paused. "Do what? All of it? The cleaning, the planning, the driving. I don't know how you ever managed." I sat across from him, setting down my bag. I managed because I didn't have a choice, and because I didn't have someone behind me critiquing every step. He looked up slowly. "Is that how I made you feel?" I nodded. "Yes, for a long time." He stared at the carpet. "I thought I was helping you stay organized." "No," I said. "You were keeping yourself in charge." Silence settled between us like dust in sunlight. He whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner? I tried." "You didn't hear me. You only heard me now because you're the one drowning." I didn't say it with venom, just truth. The next few days, Greg tried harder. Not perfectly, not kindly all the time. But he tried. He folded the laundry even if he still left socks unmatched. He stopped mocking the way I loaded the dishwasher. He even apologized when he forgot to bring in the trash bins. But it was too late for effort alone. Respect isn't something you scramble to perform after years of absence. It's something you build daily, brick by brick. And Greg had let the whole wall rot for over a decade. That weekend, I found myself journaling again, something I hadn't done consistently in years. He wants to be better. But he wants credit for effort, not accountability for damage. I can't do that for him. On Sunday, I cooked dinner. A simple pasta dish. The kids helped. The music played in the background. The house felt light again, like it had loosened the grip of something heavy. Greg came downstairs, surprised. "You cooked," he said, as if I'd returned from the dead. "Yes," I replied. "I felt like it." We all ate together, laughed, talked. Even Greg cracked a joke that didn't make anyone uncomfortable. It was nice. But when the kids were asleep and the dishwasher hummed softly in the background, he turned to me and said, "So, we're okay again." I looked at him, not cruelly, just honestly. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm getting better." He frowned. "But us, I don't know yet." That shook him, because Greg, for all his control and bravado, had assumed I was tethered to him by default, that I was too comfortable, too entangled, too dependent to leave. But now I had income. I had confidence. I had friends. I had proof on tape of the man he used to be. I wasn't trapped anymore. The next day, I printed out a copy of our joint financials, highlighted the accounts I'd opened in my name, and slid it into his hands. "What's this?" he asked. "Transparency," I said. "Just like you always wanted." He looked through the pages, silent. Then, "You're planning to leave me." "I'm planning to be ready," I replied, "in case you go back to who you were." He looked up wounded. I'm trying. I know. Keep trying. And then I walked upstairs, not to punish him, not to manipulate, but to protect myself. I wasn't waiting for Greg to fall apart anymore, but I also wasn't going to let him drag me back into the mess I'd barely climbed out of. I had worked too hard to hear my own voice again, and I wasn't about to go quiet now. The first time Melanie offered me a full-time position, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want it, I did. I'd grown to love the steady rhythm of the office, the quiet validation of being needed for more than just meals and messes. But part of me, the old Linda, still flinched at the thought of asking for more. Melanie saw it on my face. You don't have to answer now, she said gently, but you've been holding this place together better than most people with a degree and 5 years experience. We want you here. Full-time. With benefits. I nodded slowly. Thank you. She smiled. You deserve it? Deserve. That word used to make me uncomfortable. I'd spent so many years telling myself I should be grateful for what I had: a roof, a husband, healthy kids, that the idea of deserving more felt dangerous, ungrateful. But now it felt like a truth I was finally strong enough to accept. When I got home that evening, Greg was sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook open, scribbling something. A grocery list, maybe? Or another one of his new budget plans that never lasted more than a week. I placed my purse on the counter and took a breath. I got offered a full-time position, I said. Greg looked up sharply. Full-time 5 days a week? More hours? Higher pay? Health coverage? His mouth twisted slightly. So, would I just keep doing everything at home? I shrugged. You've already been doing most of it. The kids help. I help. It works. He shook his head. It doesn't work, Linda. It's a mess. The house is always loud, the dogs shedding like crazy, and Emily's socks are always missing. Greg, I said evenly, that's called life. But we were fine before. No, I corrected him. You were fine. I was drowning. He stood up suddenly. And now I'm the one drowning. I leaned against the counter. And what have you learned? He paused. I waited. He didn't answer. Because he knew. That night he barely spoke to me. He kept to himself, stewing in quiet resentment while I helped Matt with his science project and read to Emily before bed. When I came downstairs, Greg was nursing a beer, staring at the television without really watching it. You're changing everything, he muttered. I sat across from him. I'm changing me. But that changes everything, Linda. I nodded. It was always going to. He looked at me for a long time, then said something that made my heart tighten, not from love, but from clarity. I don't know if I like who you're becoming. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just said I do. And that was the first time I meant it without apology. Over the next few days, I started preparing, not for a breakup, not for a dramatic walkout, but for independence. I updated my resume. I started looking at long-term rental listings. I set up a private savings account that auto-transferred money every payday. Not because I was leaving, but because I could. And that possibility, the fact that I finally had a choice, made all the difference. Greg began to sense it. The way I walked taller. The way I no longer begged for peace or tiptoed around his moods. He asked more questions. Where were you just now? Who were you texting? Why didn't you wake me when you left? I answered plainly. I was at work. It was Melanie. Because I didn't need to. He didn't like it. You could feel the discomfort under his skin like heat behind glass. He didn't know how to reach me now, not with guilt, not with shame, not with fear. Because I had started loving my life without his approval. One night, as we got ready for bed, he stood in the doorway watching me brush my hair. You used to check in with me about everything, he said. I met his eyes in the mirror. I used to ask for permission. There's a difference. He stepped into the room, voice quiet. So what now? Now, I said. Turning to face him. You figure out if you want to be in a marriage with the woman I'm becoming, not the one I used to be." He didn't respond, and I didn't wait. I got into bed, turned off the light, and let silence speak what I didn't need to repeat anymore. In the morning, Emily left me a note on the kitchen counter in purple crayon. "Mommy, you're the strongest person I know. I love when you laugh." I cried in the car that day, not because I was sad, but because I had no idea my children had been watching this whole time, watching the way I shrank, watching the way I rose, and learning. Greg still hovered, unsure of his place now. He walked on eggshells, trying not to upset the new order of things, but also resisting it with every breath. I didn't punish him. I didn't lecture him. I just lived. I worked. I saved. I laughed. I planned. I moved. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't know how to follow. It started with a sock. A single sock on the hallway floor. Pink, inside out, clearly Emily's, and clearly not a crime. But to Greg, it might as well have been a grenade. He came stomping into the kitchen while I was washing up after dinner, holding it aloft like evidence in a trial. "This," he said sharply, "is exactly what I'm talking about." I didn't even turn around. "What are you talking about?" He dropped the sock on the counter next to me. "The mess. The chaos. Every day now it's something. And you just don't care." I dried my hands slowly, deliberately. "Greg, it's a sock. It's not just a sock," he said, voice rising. "It's proof that no one respects the house anymore, that you've let everything go." I looked at him, stunned not by the complaint but by the sheer audacity. "Let everything go," I repeated calmly. "Are you listening to yourself?" "Yes," he snapped. "And maybe you should too." There was something different about his tone tonight. It wasn't annoyance. It was desperation. Like he was losing his grip on something he'd always counted on, and the unraveling scared him. "What exactly have I let go of, Greg?" I asked, crossing my arms. He stepped closer, his hands now balled into fists at his sides. "The family. The house. Us. Everything's changed since you started working. The kids are loud. You're gone half the time. Dinner's random. The laundry's never finished." "And that's all my fault," I interrupted. "Yes," he barked, eyes wide. "Because you were the one who held it all together." I paused. And then, like ice cutting through steam, I said, "You just admitted it." He blinked. "What you just said?" "I held it all together," I repeated. "So, maybe the problem isn't that I changed Greg. Maybe the problem is that you never carried your part in the first place." Silence. A long, charged silence. Then he laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You think you're some kind of martyr now, huh?" "No," I said. "I think I'm someone who finally realized she was never a partner in this marriage, just an employee without pay." He clenched his jaw. "You're tearing this family apart." That was it. That was the moment. I stared at him, eyes narrowed, and felt something deep inside me snap, not from pain, but from clarity. "No," I said coldly. "I'm just refusing to hold it together by myself anymore." "There's a difference." He looked stunned, like I'd just slapped him. "Greg," I continued quieter now, "you used to be the man I leaned on. And maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I leaned too long, too hard. And you forgot I had bones of my own." He didn't speak. "You say I've changed. And you're right. I have. Because for the first time I realized I'm allowed to matter in my own life. That I can work and still be a good mother. That I can leave a dish in the sink and still be worthy of respect." His eyes were glassy now, red-rimmed. I'd never seen him so shaken, but I wasn't done. "You want to talk about socks on the floor? Fine. Let's talk about all the things you left behind for me to clean, all the times you made me feel small. The way you'd nitpick the counters while I stood there holding dinner in one hand and a crying baby in the other." I stepped closer. "You don't get to call me selfish just because I finally stopped being your shadow." He opened his mouth and closed it again. I walked past him, grabbed the pink sock, and tossed it in the laundry bin. Problem solved, I said. I spent the rest of the night with the kids helping Matt study for his quiz, brushing Emily's hair while she told me stories from school. We laughed, cuddled, and lived as if nothing had happened, because I wasn't giving Greg the stage anymore. Later, when the house was quiet, I found him sitting alone in the backyard. He didn't turn when I slid open the glass door. "I'm not used to this version of you," he murmured. I sat in the chair beside him. "Then maybe you never really knew me." "I thought I did." "No. You knew the version of me who kept her head down to keep the peace." He looked at me. "Do you want a divorce?" I didn't answer right away. "I want peace," I said. "I want to live in a home where I'm not blamed for things just because I stopped being convenient." He sighed. "I don't know how to fix this." "Maybe it's not about fixing," I replied. "Maybe it's about rebuilding. From scratch. On equal footing. And if we can't," I looked at the sky stars faint through the haze of suburban light. "Then we walk away. Not because we failed, but because we finally saw the truth." He didn't respond, just nodded slowly. The next morning, he made the kids breakfast. He didn't ask for thanks. Didn't complain. Just did it. Maybe he thought it would fix things, but I knew better. Change doesn't come from burnt toast and half-hearted apologies. It comes from consistency, from humility, from letting go of the person you thought you were supposed to be and showing up finally as the person others needed you to become. Greg had a long road ahead, and I had already started walking mine. There's a certain quiet that comes before someone tries to claw back control. It's not peace. It's not surrender. It's strategy. The week after our confrontation, Greg became careful. Too careful. As if he'd rehearsed every word, every movement, like he was playing a role he thought I wanted to see. He folded the laundry without being asked. He packed the kids' lunches, even remembered to include napkins and notes. He didn't criticize the house, didn't raise his voice, didn't mention the sock again. But I've lived long enough to know the difference between change and performance. Real change is uncomfortable, uneven, full of awkward humility. This was a man trying to hold on to something slipping from his fingers. On Thursday, he invited me to lunch. "Just us," he said. "I thought we could talk." Reset. I agreed, not because I was hopeful, but because I wanted to hear what version of the truth he was prepared to tell. We met at a quiet cafe near the office, one of those places with warm lighting and reclaimed wood furniture designed to feel intimate. He was already seated when I arrived back, straight hands folded a bouquet of flowers on the table. I sat across from him, glancing at the bouquet. Carnations. I hate carnations. He smiled like he didn't remember. "You look great." "Thanks," I said. He launched into small talk, the kids, the weather, something he'd read online about decluttering and mental clarity. I listened politely, waiting for the real conversation to begin. It came after the coffee. "I've been thinking a lot," he said. "About us. About everything that's happened." I nodded. "And I know I wasn't fair to you. I pushed too hard. Expected too much." He paused, searching my face for approval. I stayed neutral. He continued. "But I think we can get back to what we had. If we just slow down." There it was. Slow down. He didn't want to catch up to me. He wanted me to wait for him, to stall my momentum so he could feel in control again. "I'm not slowing down, Greg," I said, my voice steady. He blinked. "I didn't mean it like that. I miss us." I stirred my tea. "Which version of us do you miss? The one where I kept quiet and did everything, or the one where I finally started living again?" He flinched. "I'm trying," he said. "I know. But trying isn't enough anymore. Not for me." He leaned forward. "So what, you just want to throw away 20 years of marriage?" No, I replied. I want to stop pretending that 20 years of marriage means I owe you my silence. His jaw tightened. You're twisting everything. No, I said. I'm finally telling the truth. You just don't like how it sounds. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then he played his card. I spoke to my lawyer. I tilted my head. About what? About what would happen if we separated. I felt my stomach clench, not with fear but anticipation. He was bluffing. He thought threatening the one thing I was already prepared for would shake me. I set my cup down. That's your choice. He stared at me. You're not surprised, he asked. No, you're not scared, Greg, I said, leaning forward. I've already lived through the worst part of this marriage. You just didn't notice because I did it quietly. He sat back, eyes darting. The weight of my words sank in, and that was when his expression changed. He wasn't angry. He was afraid. Not of me. Of what I meant without him. Later that night, he didn't speak. He paced the kitchen, shuffled papers, hovered near the doorway while I folded laundry with Emily. At one point, he stood behind me, holding his phone. You should know, he said, if we split, I'm not leaving the house. I didn't look up. That's fine. I'll go. Emily glanced at us. I smiled at her, gently folding another shirt. Are you and Daddy fighting again? She asked. No, I said. We're just figuring out how to treat each other better. Greg's eyes dropped to the floor. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Not because anything had been resolved, but because I knew where I stood, and I wasn't moving backward. The next morning, I got a text from my bank, direct deposit received, my new full-time salary. I stared at it for a long time, then smiled. It wasn't just money. It was proof that I could build a life, support myself, choose something different. That afternoon, I visited an apartment complex I'd been eyeing. 2 bedrooms, natural light, close to the kids' school. The leasing agent was warm, efficient. She walked me through the unit, the polished floors clicking under my shoes. This is just a viewing, I told her. She smiled. Take your time, but we only have 2 units left this month. I looked around at the clean lines, the quiet. I could see myself there. Not starting over, starting true. Back home, Greg was making spaghetti when I walked in. He looked up, hopeful. You're home early. I had a showing. He dropped the spoon. A what? An apartment? He stepped back. You're really doing this. I'm thinking clearly. Linda, I'm not leaving out of anger, Greg, I said softly. I'm leaving because peace should never feel like rebellion. His face collapsed. But I didn't. I stood still, steady and whole. I didn't pack everything. Not yet. Just the essentials: clothes, documents, my journals, and the things the kids had made for me over the years. Finger-painted cards, a crumpled World's Best Mom certificate, a snow globe Emily swore would protect me. The rest, the furniture, the curtains, the wedding china we hadn't touched in 10 years, I left behind. Not because I was being generous, because I didn't need them. They weren't mine, not really. They were props in a life I'd been performing, not living. When I told the kids, I expected tears. Instead, I got quiet nods. Are we going with you? Matt asked. Brows furrowed. Not right away, I said gently. We'll ease into it. I want you to feel safe and stable. Nothing changes with school. We'll make it work together. Emily tilted her head. Will Daddy be mad? I sighed. He might. But that's not your job to fix. They took it better than I expected. Children are resilient when truth is spoken gently. Greg, on the other hand, did not take it well. I told him one evening after dinner, when the kids were upstairs brushing their teeth, and the kitchen was humming with the sound of a dishwasher he'd finally learned to load. I signed the lease, I said calmly. Move-ins next Friday. He turned from the sink, dish towel in hand, stunned. You're really leaving? I nodded. For how long, I don't know. You're breaking up our family. No, I replied. I'm refusing to keep living in a house where love only exists when I'm convenient. He stepped closer. You said you'd give me time, and I did. But Greg, you're not asking for time. You're asking for me to pause my growth while you decide whether I'm still useful. His jaw clenched. That's not fair. Neither was spending 15 years being criticized for not folding towels your way. He slammed the dish towel onto the counter. You're being dramatic. That word again. He said it the same way he always had, like a gavel coming down on my emotions, declaring them invalid. But this time, I didn't shrink. I looked him in the eye and said, No, I'm being honest. He left the room without another word. That week, he tried new tactics. He cooked more, took the kids out for ice cream, complimented my outfit, rubbed my shoulders once awkwardly like he was mimicking something he saw in a movie, but none of it felt real. Not because he didn't care, because he cared too late. And I no longer needed his care to validate my worth. On Thursday, I picked up the apartment keys. The leasing agent handed me the envelope with a smile. Fresh paint, deep cleaned, ready to go. You're going to love it. I stood in the living room of the new unit staring at the empty walls, the sun pouring through sheer white curtains. No clutter, no echoes of shouting, just silence, space, breath. I sat on the floor back against the wall and cried, not from sadness, from relief. I texted Melanie I did it. She replied with a heart emoji and the words, "About time, my friend." That night, Greg was waiting for me when I got home. He was sitting at the dining table, a beer in one hand, an envelope in the other. I talked to a lawyer, he said. I hung up my coat. Okay. They said custody would be complicated. I nodded. Of course. That's why I'm not asking for full custody right now. You think you can just take off and keep the kids when it's convenient? I think I said, sitting down across from him, that we can co-parent better from a place where we're not constantly hurting each other. He looked at me, eyes glossy. So that's it. It's the beginning, I corrected him. He slumped forward, hands in his hair. I thought we'd grow old together. You were growing, I said softly. I was aging, and that was the difference. 2 days later, I moved into the apartment. Matt and Emily helped unpack books and fill drawers. Emily picked a purple blanket for the couch. Matt tested every light switch like it was a new invention. We ordered pizza and sat cross-legged on the living room floor. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. That weekend, Greg asked if the kids could stay with him for 2 nights. I agreed. When he picked them up, he didn't say much. Just stood in the doorway avoiding my gaze. Emily hugged me tight. Will you be okay? I'll be more than okay, I said. I'll be free. After they left, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine and listened to the quiet. It was strange, the kind of silence that didn't weigh on your chest but made you feel light. The kind that didn't feel like absence. It felt like possibility. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like anyone's employee. I didn't feel like anyone's failure. I felt like myself, unfolding, expanding, becoming. The first night alone in the apartment, I woke up at 3:00 a.m. to absolute silence. Not the kind of silence that buzzes with tension, not the kind that follows an argument or hides a slammed door. This was soft, spacious, like the air itself had exhaled. And I realized something. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't waiting to be criticized, corrected, compared to Greg's mother or someone's Pinterest board. I was just being. That morning, I made coffee in my new kitchen. It still smelled like fresh paint and cardboard, but it already felt more like home than the house I had shared with Greg for 15 years. I didn't rush. No school lunches to pack, no voices barking from upstairs about missing socks or printer paper. Just me. Just quiet. Just space to think. I pulled out my journal, the same one I'd scribbled into during the worst nights, and wrote something I'd never dared write before. I am enough without anyone watching me. The words didn't feel defiant. They felt true. Later that week, I brought over a stack of photo albums from storage. Not the curated ones Greg liked to keep on the coffee table, but the messy ones, the raw ones. Photos of me in hospital gowns, of baby food smeared across our kitchen walls, of me asleep on the couch, one child in each arm. Evidence that I had always been there, that I had always been doing everything. I laid them out on the living room floor, page after page of moments Greg had overlooked while chasing some illusion of domestic perfection, and I whispered to myself, "You did all of this, and you survived it." The next day, Melanie and Clara, my friend from the support group, came over with takeout and a bottle of red wine. They sat cross-legged on the floor with me dipping spring rolls into peanut sauce and laughing like women who remembered how. "You have light in your face now," Clara said. I paused, chopsticks in hand. "What do you mean? You used to look braced," she said, "like your whole body was waiting to be scolded." I blinked, suddenly emotional. I didn't even know I looked like that. "That's what survival looks like," Melanie added softly. "But now, you look like someone who came back to life." Later that night, after they left, I lay on my new mattress, still on the floor, no headboard yet, and stared at the ceiling with tears streaming down my cheeks. Not because I was sad, because I believed them, because I saw it too. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. I painted. I bought a second-hand easel and set it up by the window. Nothing fancy, just strokes of color freedom without permission. I joined a book club. I went for walks without needing to explain where I was going. And then one Saturday morning, I wore a dress I'd buried in the back of the closet for years, soft cotton, pale blue hits just above the knee. Greg had once called it too youthful for a mother of two, but that day I wore it with red lipstick, and I didn't shrink. When I dropped the kids off that afternoon, Greg's eyes flickered. Not with desire, with confusion. He didn't recognize me anymore, and that was the point. "New dress?" he asked. I smiled. "Old dress. New woman." He didn't respond. Later, Matt texted me a photo of the dog lying upside down on the carpet, tongue out. I laughed so hard I cried. Greg might not have understood the new version of me, but my kids did. They saw a woman with energy again, a mom who smiled with her eyes, who didn't flinch when the door slammed. Emily said one night over dinner, "You're like a superhero now." "Why?" I asked, surprised. "Because you made a whole new life out of nothing," she said. "That's magic." I wiped my eyes. "No, baby. That's clarity." Around this time, I started mentoring a new hire at the office, a single mom younger than me trying to rebuild after leaving a verbally abusive relationship. She thanked me after our first meeting. I told her, "If I made it through, you can too." And I meant it. Because here's what I'd learned. Peace doesn't come when the house is clean, the fridge is full, and no one's raising their voice. Peace comes when you know who you are, and you stop asking others for permission to be her. I wasn't perfect. The apartment still got messy. I forgot to pay a bill once. I got overwhelmed some mornings and sat on the floor with my coffee staring at the wall. But the difference. There was no one around to punish me for it. No one assigning me guilt like it was a utility bill I had forgotten to pay. Just me. Messy. Whole. Free. One evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror brushing my hair before bed. And I looked at myself. Really looked. Not for wrinkles or tired eyes or lines from years of stretching myself thin. I looked for the fire. And I found it. Still there. Still burning. Not loud. Not flashy. But steady. And mine. He knocked on my door on a Sunday afternoon. No warning. No text. Just a soft, uncertain knock. The kind of knock someone gives when they're not sure they should be there. I opened it slowly, and there he was, Greg. standing in a wrinkled, button-down, eyes, tired hands, empty. No bouquet this time, no takeout to win favor. Just him. Smaller than I remembered. "Hi," he said. "Hi." We stood there in silence, the sounds of the neighborhood drifting in behind him. A child's bike bell, a dog barking, a lawnmower in the distance. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to feel it first. I nodded. Just for a few minutes. He stepped inside and glanced around the apartment. It was clean, but lived-in books stacked near the window, the kids' artwork taped to the fridge, my easel standing tall in the corner. "It's nice," he said. "It's mine," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I can tell." I offered him a seat on the couch. He sat on the edge like someone in a waiting room, not quite comfortable, not quite ready. "I've been thinking a lot," he began. I stayed quiet. "About what you said. What you've been saying for years, really." Still, I didn't speak. He exhaled. "I was wrong, Linda." I blinked. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I'd waited so long to hear it, I wasn't sure what to do with it now that it had arrived. "I didn't see you," he continued. "I thought I did, but I saw what I expected you to be, not who you actually were." I folded my hands in my lap. "I treated you like a fixture, like part of the furniture. Always there, always reliable, never needing thanks." He looked down. "And when you started changing, I panicked. Not because you were doing anything wrong, but because I realized I didn't know how to function without you doing everything." I closed my eyes briefly. "I'm not here to ask for you back," he said quickly. "I don't deserve that." I opened my eyes again. He was watching me now, but not the way he used to, not with entitlement. With reverence. Like a man seeing a storm from the outside for the first time and realizing it's not meant to be tamed. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he added. That word sorry had lost its weight after being used so casually over the years. But this one landed differently, because there was no agenda behind it. He wasn't trying to fix, or win, or reset. He was just finally naming what he had broken. I let the silence stretch for a few moments before speaking. "Greg," I said softly, "you didn't just ignore the things I did. You made me believe they were never enough. You chipped away at me bit by bit until I couldn't see my own worth." He swallowed. "And when I finally stood up, you acted like I was the one who tore everything apart. But I was just walking away from the fire you'd already started." He nodded, eyes wet. "I know. I'm not angry anymore," I continued. "But I'm not the same woman who stood in our kitchen trying to fold towels the right way, to make you love me." "I see that now," he whispered. "And I'm not going back," I said firmly. "This life I've built, this space, it's not a rebellion, it's a reclamation." He looked at the floor. I stood and walked to the fridge, grabbed 2 waters, handed him one. He took it carefully like it might break. We sat again. "I've been going to counseling," he said after a beat. "Trying to understand where I went wrong, why I always needed to be in control." And I asked. I was afraid, he admitted, that if I didn't control everything, I'd be irrelevant. I nodded. "Now you know how I felt for 15 years. He wiped his eyes. "I miss the kids. They miss you too. And you can still be their father, a good one, without needing to own me in the process." "I understand that now." I stood. So did he. At the door, he turned back. "You look different. Stronger." "I am." He hesitated. "Can I ask you one thing?" "Depends." He gave a small, uncertain smile. "Do you still love me?" I inhaled, not sharply, not painfully, just deeply. And then I said the thing I never thought I'd be able to say without breaking. "I love who we were once. I love the children we raised. But the love I had for you, it didn't survive the version of you I lived with." He closed his eyes, just for a second. And when he opened them again, they were red, but clear. Thank you for being honest. He stepped outside. I didn't follow. The door clicked shut behind him like the soft punctuation at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat by the window with my cup of tea and stared at the sky, pink and gold and wide open. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was free. And that, after everything, was enough. I used to believe that a clean home meant I was doing everything right. If the counters sparkled, if the floor had vacuum lines, if the laundry was neatly folded in matching baskets, maybe then I thought I would finally be good enough. Maybe then he'd say, "Thank you." Maybe then I could rest. But the truth, no amount of scrubbing ever bought me peace, because it wasn't the mess that made our home hard to live in. It was the blame, the pressure, the constant expectation that I be invisible in my efforts and still present enough to be blamed when something went wrong. Now, standing in the middle of my little apartment, sun spilling across the kitchen table, the scent of coffee and paint lingering in the air, I finally understand something I never dared speak aloud back then. It was never about the dishes, or the socks, or the system. It was about power. Who held it? Who gave it away? And who finally decided to stop cleaning up after other people's emotional messes. I no longer live in fear of being labeled messy. I live in freedom. Sometimes the dishes sit overnight. Sometimes the mail piles up. Sometimes I eat cereal for dinner and don't feel guilty. Because I'm not performing anymore. I'm living. A few weeks after Greg visited, I got a letter in the mail. It was short, typed, no return address. Linda, I've been trying to write this for days. You were right. I didn't lose you because you stopped loving me. I lost you because I never really saw you. The house is quiet now. Too quiet. I'm learning. Late. But I'm learning. Thank you for everything. Greg. I read it once, folded it up, and placed it in a drawer. Not because I needed to save it, but because I needed to let it go. Life didn't magically become perfect after I left. There were hard days, lonely nights, financial puzzles, moments when I missed the comfort of routine, even the dysfunctional kind. But what changed was the voice inside me. It no longer whispered, "Maybe you're overreacting." It said, "You're allowed to want more." The kids adjusted slowly and beautifully. Matt became more independent. He helped Emily with her homework and asked real questions, the kind that showed he was thinking deeply now. Emily smiled more, laughed from her belly. She started drawing again, filling pages with bold, joyful color. They saw me rest. They saw me paint. They saw me say no and mean it. And in watching me reclaim my dignity, I saw them begin to claim their own. That, to me, was the real healing. People ask me sometimes if I'll ever go back, if Greg and I might work things out. But they never understand I didn't leave to punish him. I left to return to myself, to the woman buried beneath years of unpaid labor and unpaid attention. And I don't need him to suffer to validate my choice. I just need to keep choosing me, every day. This story began with a sock. A single sock on the floor that became the tipping point, not because it mattered, but because it symbolized everything I had been carrying alone. I used to bend over, pick it up, and tuck it quietly into the basket, hoping someone would notice how hard I was trying. Now I step over it, because life is bigger than laundry. And love, real love, doesn't keep score of crumbs and towels. It holds space. It softens. It sees. I see myself now. Not as a wife, not as a maid, not as a background character in someone else's story, but as a woman who woke up, who took the risk to leave a version of life that was safe but stifling, and found that she didn't need to be saved. She just needed to stop asking permission to live. If this story feels familiar, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, If you've ever tiptoed around someone else's temper, if you've ever wondered whether your worth depends on how clean the house is, let this be your sign. You're not a mess. You're not dramatic. You're not too much. You're just ready. And you don't owe anyone an apology for growing. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd love to hear yours. Comment below or just know you're not alone. And if you want more stories like this one, you know what to do. Subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because every woman deserves to be heard, and every truth deserves to be told.